appreciate everybody being here. We've got a great event taking place here. First off, before we get started, I just want to introduce Don Carter from TD Bank, who is kind enough to have hosted us or hosting us today. Their facilities are incredible. We love being hosted here. And just want to add that TD Bank is a tremendous supporter of New York City businesses. They are truly vested in the city on all facets, involved with our chamber, but also with a host of other organizations in the city, and they do their part. That's what we call real business that really contribute to our community. And so again, thank you to TD for all the work that they do. So these are the Chairman's Breakfast. We try to make these into insightful events, providing real information in terms of what's vital to you. Often we invite our elected officials, so you have access to them. In other cases, we provide insights into New York City. In this particular forum, this is going to be providing you with great insights in terms of what's happening with our economy. We're going to take this from a macro level. We have Nasdaq here, who's going to be joining us. They joined us last year, and it's incredible how prophetic they were in being able to really tell us where the future is going to lie. They were accurate on so many counts, and it's really been incredible, and looking forward to the same kind of insights this year to provide some guidance to us. From there, we're going to take it down to a city level. Jessica's going to give us an overview in terms of what's happening with the city economy and her insights from all the information she's gleaned. And then we're going to take it down to a lower level, onto the retail level, to really get into the weeds of what's going on the city landscape on the retail level. That's so vital to us for so many reasons. It really is important to really give an indicator in terms of what's happening on the ground from a business perspective. But beyond that, it also creates the visibility and the optics of, is your city healthy or not when you see a vibrant retail environment on the ground. So thrilled to have them here as well. So without further ado, I don't want to delay anybody. I'm going to get right into introducing Michael Normyle. I hope I pronounced that right, because I generally get those things wrong. And he's going to give us an economic outlook on, again, the more macro level. So again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to your insights.
So before we get to 2026, I just want to review where we stand right now. And so this is looking at the 6 indicators, coincident indicators of the U.S. economy that the National Bureau of Economic Research assesses when they're trying to determine if the economy is in expansion or contraction. So we're talking about GDP, industrial production, jobs, income, consumer spending, and business sales. And so if we were in a recession, all of these lines would be turning down. As you can see, they're all in upturns, indicating that the economy remains solidly in expansion. The one bit of softness is with the jobs here. This line has flattened out a little bit at the end, so we've got a bit of a soft labor market currently. Getting to our first tailwind, and one that should help with that soft labor market, is that the Fed is going to bring rates down next year. So the blue line here, that's the Fed funds rate. They've cut rates twice this year after being on hold for 9 months to start the year. The expectation is we see 1 more rate cut in December, 3 more next year. That's the light blue line at the end there. So that should bring the Fed funds rate down to about 3% by the end of next year. The rationale for this being that the labor market is soft, so the Fed needs to support the labor market with rate cuts. You have probably seen in the news a lot of Fed officials talking about concerns about inflation. My personal belief is that that won't be as much of an issue next year. The reason being that we've had core services inflation slowing for a few years now. One component of that being housing due to softer housing demand with higher mortgage rates. The other being the soft labor market has led to softer wage growth. And so the 2 big components of services inflation are wages and housing. And so those have both been in a multi-year downtrend. The one piece pushing up inflation right now is goods inflation. That's mostly tariff-driven pass-through. I think that later next year that should end, and at that point the one driver of inflation will start to go away, and that will enable the Fed to continue cutting rates. And that should help support demand, but also especially help small caps and small businesses. And the reason why is that small caps and small businesses are much more reliant on floating rate debt than larger businesses. So here we have interest expense as a share of earnings. If you focus on the green line, that's for small caps. When the Fed started their rate hike cycle in 2022, just over 20% of earnings was being devoted to interest expense. It's since risen to 47%. But if you look at mid caps and large caps, which have progressively more access to fixed rate debt, they were much less impacted by the Fed's rate hike cycle. And so with rates coming down, this should be especially beneficial for interest expense for small caps and small businesses. But since it didn't hurt mid caps and large caps as much on the way up, they shouldn't benefit as much on the way down. Second, we have deregulation and tax cuts. So with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act being passed in the middle of this year, that is going to benefit consumers and businesses. And so focusing on the blue portions of the bars here, this is the percent change in real after-tax income due to those tax cuts for consumers. And so for consumers as a whole, we're looking at about a 1.5% boost to real after-tax incomes. And then on the right side of the chart here, we're looking at that by income quintile. And so as you go up the income spectrum, you see that the benefits from the tax cuts get larger and larger. In reality, people on the higher end of the income spectrum do the bulk of spending. So the top 10% by income do nearly half of all spending in the US. So this should continue to support spending from people on the higher end of the income spectrum. Secondarily, the Congressional Budget Office estimated that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act tax cuts will add 0.9 percentage points to 2026 real GDP growth, with the bulk of that being the corporate tax breaks. So those should help support business investment. Another factor that should help support business investment is reduced uncertainty. So here we're looking at future CapEx plans that businesses from all the different regional Fed banks have responded to, and comparing to whether they are above or below average relative to this period that we're looking at here. And so you can see coming into the start of last year, the post-election, we saw these CapEx plans rise to the highest level that we've seen in a few years. And so that was a lot of optimism coming out of the election that we would see this pro-business agenda, deregulation, tax cuts, all those types of things. Instead, we get to April and we see that tariffs were really the focus of the agenda to start the year. And those CapEx plans fell to the lowest levels that we've seen since COVID and the financial crisis. And so with policy being very fluid, especially around trade, companies were very, very hesitant to make any long-term investments. Now that policy has firmed up a bit, we've started to see these CapEx plans recover, and even as you focus on the tail end here, start to improve more compared to where they were the last few years here. So between the tax cuts and the reduced uncertainty, that should help support business investment. And I highlight non-AI because if you've been reading about all the AI CapEx and stuff like that, it's pretty interest rate insensitive. But for everyone else, it should be quite helpful. And so turning to AI, I want to talk about how AI is real in terms of what it means for earnings for companies. So here on the horizontal axis, we're looking at earnings growth from 2022 to mid-2025 by sector. And so you can see all the sectors with the strongest earnings growth are all the sectors with the big AI hyperscalers. So consumer discretionary, communication services, information technology. So that's got NVIDIA, Oracle, Broadcom, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Meta, Tesla. So all these companies, they've seen the strongest earnings growth, and then the vertical axis is their returns over the last 3 years. And so they've also seen the strongest gains. And so this AI spending is real earnings because it's demand for chips, it's demand for cloud computing, it's demand for AI chatbots. So it is really translating to real dollars for these companies. By index, you can see that the Nasdaq 100 has had the strongest return since the start of 2023. And of course, the Nasdaq 100 has the most AI exposure out of all the major indexes. So it's up about 130% since the start of 2023, while S&P 500 is up about 75%. And if you look at small caps, European stocks, Asia Pacific stocks, it's more like 30 to 35%. And so to put some numbers on it in terms of those AI hyperscalers, so Google, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, Oracle, this is the CapEx that they've done in the last few years. And in 2023, they spent $125 billion on CapEx. Last year, that rose to over $200 billion. This year, it's $350 billion. Next year, over $450 billion. And if you focus on the blue line, this is the CapEx as a share of operating cash flow. So it's gone from about 40% last year to about 60% this year. And there's, of course, been a lot of talk, if you're following the markets, about AI bubbles. The big difference between now and the dot-com bubble is that these are all companies with real earnings, and they're funding their investments out of their cash flow. Of course, there has been a bit of a pivot more recently to using debt financing as well. But so all this spending on AI is impacting the real economy. So looking at construction spending on data centers has tripled since ChatGPT was released. And just for context, looking at spending on offices, so we're nearly spending as much nationwide building offices as we are building data centers right now, which of course is a dramatic change from where we were just 3 years ago. In terms of what this means for business investment and GDP growth, the left-hand side is looking at looking at business investment, and the red bars are tech, the yellow bars are everything else. And so for the last year, you can see strong and accelerating growth in business investment for tech, all that AI capex, and negative investment growth for everything else. And so that's the interest rate sensitive sectors that are being held back by the Fed's rate hike cycle, or the higher for longer rates rather. In terms of what that means for GDP, just these last 2 quarters, you can see nearly all of GDP was driven by tech spending. And the expectation is that AI tech spending should remain a driver of GDP. It shouldn't be the only driver of GDP. There were some quirks in the first half of the year with all the changes in tariff policy, a lot of imports before tariffs kicked in that kind of messed around with the GDP numbers. So this should not be what we expect going forward, but tech should remain a driver of GDP. And to take a bit more of a historical perspective here, looking at the AI capex cycle, it's expected to be one of the historically large capex cycles that we've seen. So the blue bars is looking at capex as a share of GDP. So railroads, they really set the standard, 6% of GDP at their peak. The internet was about 1% of GDP, AI also about 1% of GDP. And of course, the expectation based on those capex plans that we looked at is that the AI share should continue to rise from here. The big difference, though, is the red bars, which is adjusting that capex for the depreciation cycle. So if you put railroad tracks down in 30 years, they're pretty much worth what they were when you put them down. If you buy cutting edge AI chips, their life cycle is 3, 4, 5 years. If you look at the cost of building a data center, 40 to 50% is just chips. So the return on investment needs to be much faster for these AI investments than for things like fiber optic cable for the internet or railroad tracks for the railroads. And so the hope that this payoff comes through in higher productivity. So here we're looking at productivity growth from 1990 to 2025. And if you focus on the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, during that internet boom, we saw about a 2 percentage point boost to productivity growth for a 10-year period. And that's really a material boost to economic growth because in terms of trend growth, it's basically labor productivity growth plus labor force growth. And so right now we have an aging population that's going to slow down our labor force growth. And so we need to offset that drag with productivity growth. And so the hope is that that's what we see from AI. And with higher productivity growth, you also tend to become a wealthier country. So here we're looking at real GDP per person on the horizontal axis, and the vertical axis is the Global Innovation Index. And so the more innovative a country has been, the richer they've tended to be. And so the hope is that with all this AI investment, the US will continue to innovate, continue to boost our productivity, and continue to grow the economy. So that's kind of the longer term picture. In the shorter term, really the expectation is that AI spending will help boost the economy, that reduced uncertainty, those tax cuts that will help business investment and consumer demand, and a similar story with the Fed rate cuts as well. And I think we have maybe a couple minutes for questions. Maybe 1 or 2? Yeah.
We see the great emphasis you're putting on the AI in terms of impact on our economy. The one area you highlighted in terms of the soft spot comes the labor market. So if we can talk a little about into the labor market, AI, and what you see in terms of the future, in terms of that grave concern that a lot of people have in terms of that labor element, in terms of the dwindling of jobs.
Yeah, that's definitely been a big concern that we have certainly heard a lot about. And the reality is right now, there's not been much impact from AI on jobs. And a big reason why is that adoption rates are quite low. The census actually does a biweekly survey of companies saying, have you used AI in the last 2 weeks to produce goods and services? And so it's only about 10% of companies nationwide that are actually using AI to produce goods and services right now. Now that's a separate question from, do you have access to AI tools, or do you have, Copilot or ChatGPT or whatever? It's, are you actually using AI in production? And so very few companies right now are actually doing that. The expectation, though, is that over the next 3-5 years, that's going to start to change. And of course, the sectors that are most exposed are the sectors where AI is strongest already. So that's things like software engineering, customer service, things like that. And there is even some evidence in those two specific areas that entry-level workers have started to see some reduction in employment levels. So it is starting to really impact entry-level in hyper-specific areas, but economy-wide, it's really not a factor. It's more the uncertainty that we were talking about in 2025, and then still drag from the Fed's rate hike cycle, because the whole point of the Fed's rate hike cycle in 2022 was to cool off the labor market, to slow down wage growth, to slow down inflation. And they've done exactly that. But right now, the hiring rate is the lowest it's been in 10 years. So that's why it's time to cut rates and support the labor market. So I think, more medium term, the AI impact on employment will become more real. Right now, it's not as much of an issue. Oh, and we had one more back there.
Earlier to the next question, I represent Brewer College at the University of New York, so entry-level labor is foremost on our mind. The jury's still out on AI. Do you anticipate that lower interest rates will stimulate entry-level hiring, or do you think it's going to remain flat with the increased adoption of AI?
Well, I think we need to figure out a way to continue to have entry-level employees, because if you want to have 10 years from now, employees with experience, you need to have entry-level workers today. So it's going to be a change of what those roles look like, a change of how they are trained, but that needs to be something especially for companies that are forward-looking, right? You can't just hope to poach someone with 10 years of experience down the line and have that be your plan forever, right? So I think it's a thorny question that companies really need to wrestle with and determine what makes sense. But I think you can't eliminate these entry-level roles, because you want that institutional knowledge. You want people to grow into these roles, and you can't do that by just skipping over that entry-level experience. I think, do we have time for one more? Okay.
You mentioned that the investment, the share of investment in AI is coming largely from revenues as opposed to debt. Can you talk a little bit about how that changes the risk profile for those companies and what risks are inherent in such a large share of their revenue being spent on capital?
Yeah, well, so it is starting to change a bit, where they are starting to tap debt markets for that financing, and they're really kind of spreading the risk around with other partners. There's Meta, for example, did a debt financing deal where I believe Blue Owl Capital is actually the one that technically owns it. So there is, some spreading of it. I think from my perspective, it's not as much of a risk. It's a show of their strength that they can afford to fund this out of their free cash flow for the most part, at least up to this point. And I was thinking about it more in the context of people saying we're in an AI bubble. This is .com 2.0. And the .com bubble, it was a lot of highly unprofitable companies. I believe the PE ratio for Yahoo was 2,000 in the late 1990s. For the major companies today, they're mostly below 50. So it's definitely not it's not an apples to apples comparison on that front. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Tatiana with Dale Carnegie and Associates. I was very surprised by your initial graphs regarding that the U.S. economy is in good shape. I'm originally from Europe, and I don't know if I'm still under fake news or something, but every time I hear my colleagues in the UK or in Germany speak about the U.S. economy, usually it says, we're in recession or as good as in recession. Now seeing these numbers was of course very enlightening, and the general consensus is that only the AI investment of these large companies has saved the U.S. economy this year. What do you think where this information comes from?
Well, I don't think that's an entirely inaccurate description of the first half of this year, but that was because of a lot of unusual factors. So basically all that strength in AI spending kind of papered over some weakness in the first half where there was a ton of imports, record import levels in January, February, and March because people wanted to get as much stuff over here before tariffs started. And of course, that's a rational thing to do, but imports are negative for GDP. So that was why we had actually a negative GDP print in the first quarter. And then in the second quarter, when we had all the tariffs coming out, that had a chilling effect on spending. So there was some, unusual things happening in the first half of this year that fortunately, from kind of an economy-wide perspective, were papered over by all that AI spending. And that's just the GDP piece. And the economy as a whole, there's a few areas where we have kind of a two-speed economy. If you look at consumers, high-end consumers are doing really well. There's a wealth effect where people on the higher end, they tend to own stocks, they tend to own homes. We have record stock prices, we have record home prices. They also have had faster wage growth lately. People on the low end, really the only driver of their spending is wage growth, and wage growth has been slowing faster for lower wage jobs. So there's kind of a two-speed economy with consumers. It's a bit of a similar story with businesses where small businesses, small caps, they've been really feeling that interest expense weight, and then mid and large caps, it's been less of an issue for them. So the totality of the data kind of aggregates can hide some areas of weakness. And so as a whole, the economy is doing fine, but there are certainly pockets of weakness there. But certainly not a recession, sorry.
No, we have to
Thanks.
Well, good morning, everyone. Part of what we want to talk about today is just sort of to try to, I think when you mentioned all the noise that we're hearing, we're getting all of these different signals about the economy and what's happening. And I hear it every day when I'm out talking to businesses. They have many, many questions. And many do fear we're headed for a recession, all of that. So I just wanted to sort of go through the fundamentals of where we are so everybody understands. I am not an economist. This is really just digging into the data that we all have access to and can see. So big picture, I think will echo what Michael is saying, is that the fundamentals, our foundation is very, very strong. But what we have seen is that things have slowed down, especially in job growth. So where's the clicker? Thanks. Okay, so a few things here. I want to acknowledge we still have record level. The number of jobs in New York City is the highest it has ever been. It still remains that way. However, job growth has slowed. We were really, really booming in 2022, 2023, and things have really slowed. And you'll see that most of the gains now are coming from healthcare, education, local services, but the finance, tech, all of that is where we have slowed in the professional services. So that is concerning. So takeaway, high level of activity, but a slower engine. Okay, so I'm just gonna go into a few things here. This is tourism and traffic. This is one of the high points. I think that there was a fear that international travel was going to really impact our tourism because the city did do a downtrend of their expectations for the year. But we have been doing well. Visitor spending is still a bright spot. We have hotels, restaurants, retail corridors are busy again. And of course, we'll hear a little bit later, this is very supportive for our storefront businesses. So we're going to be we'll take a deep dive in just a second. The risk is that we continue to be exposed to global travel and geopolitical shocks. But overall, demand for visitors and residents is a real strength. And I think everybody here knows that next year, we're going to have we call it our summer of opportunity, because we're going to be hosting the FIFA World Cup games in our region, and also Sail 250, which is a big event around the 4th of July. And that is going to bring millions and millions of visitors and have a huge economic impact. So that is going to be huge for our economy. Offices and real estate, here what we see is it's still elevated versus 2019, but off the worst levels. So what we're seeing is a flight to quality. Businesses, we call it actually the one Vanderbilt effect. Buildings like this that are beautiful and have all the amenities and all the views are doing really, really well. But the Class B and C buildings that are the older stock, those are starting to suffer because, again, employers are trying to provide the amenities that are going to bring people back to the office. So we are starting to see sort of this bifurcation. And of course, all of this affects tax revenue and the small businesses that rely on office workers. It's all interrelated there. So long story short here, we're not in a doom loop, but in a long transition to a new office reality. We all know about the 3-day work week, and that has a long-term impact. I think we're really starting to see that this is the new normal. Again, we're going to do a deeper dive here, but what we can say positively is that street life looks vibrant. We have our busy corridors again, which is always great, and new concepts. There's lots of experiential restaurants, retail shops, which really does bring a lot of vibrancy to our neighborhoods. But owners are being squeezed by costs, high rents, wages, insurance, and interest rates. Many are doing volume, but on very thin margins. So there's very little cushion if there were to be a shock or a downturn. Affordability, simpler rules, and access to capital are critical. And I'm sure when we get into that conversation, we will hear more about that. So just quickly, outlook for 2026. I think we have some real core strengths. We continue to be the place to be. We still are able to attract talent and people and capital and ideas. We still have a strong brand as New York City. And I think that we do have good fiscal and financial strengths, very strong tax base, which we need to keep. And of course, there are new growth areas, AI, life sciences, green tech are emerging. We are on track to be known more for tech than finance at some point. That really is the direction that we're heading in. Of course, there are vulnerabilities. However, job and business growth are slowing as the cycle matures. Michael was very optimistic and sort of showing that uncertainty is leveling off, which could be very good. That means that businesses would again start to put more money in and investments here in the city. Legacy real estate in some corridors remain strained, as I mentioned. And again, we're highly exposed to national and global slowdowns. And so this just sort of highlights where we think what we need to be doing in the new year. We need to be watching the indicators clearly to be on top of where we're headed. Developing our small biz agenda, which again, you'll hear more about. We definitely need more conversions here in Manhattan, office to residential to help those B and C stocks. Also, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but there is a big issue that's going to hit a lot of those businesses. Many of the B and C stock buildings were able to get very good rates on loans during the COVID years, and many of those are going to be coming up at the end of this year, at the end of this year. So they're going to be refinancing at higher rates, which could put a real squeeze on some of those businesses. So look for that. That is going to be a problem. Clearly, public safety is something we're going to continue to focus on, but we have seen a lot of good stats in recent years. So that is getting better. Okay, and of course we need to partner where we can. So this is just sort of the major themes. I just wanted to sort of provide a little bit of context about where we are, as I said. Now I'm going to move into what I call our storefront tracker. And then we're going to speak with some storefront business owners. This is some original data that we actually did at the Chamber. I want to thank our staff, Harry and Maggie, there they are, for doing a lot of this work. You're going to see they worked really hard on this. And again, this is part of what we call our Storefront Resurgence Project. Coming out of COVID, we have been working really hard to make sure that our commercial corridors remain vibrant. And we are joined by Jacinta from Senator Gillibrand's office, who has been very instrumental in funding some of this work. So thank you. And let's go. Here's some of the data. So this is a confusing slide, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. So what we wanted to do, we thought it was really important to look at the number of businesses that have opened versus those that have closed since COVID. And what you'll see is we lost more than 16,000 businesses, but over that time period, more than 15,000 opened. And when we look at the last year, it's not on the slide, but when we look at the last year, we're actually we're net up like almost 200 businesses. So that is a good thing. The other thing I want to point out is if you look at the composition of storefronts currently, nearly half, 47.2%, have opened since COVID. Nearly half of all storefronts. So that is, a big deal. All right, so we have in Manhattan a total of more than 37,000 storefront businesses. Again, these are the restaurants, retail shops, gyms, barber shops, salons, all of it that we all, hopefully we all, go to. Storefront vacancy rate in Manhattan is at 13.43%. This is high. We want it to ideally be between 5 and 10%. And you'll see the citywide vacancy is also above that level, but it is highest in Manhattan. Of all the boroughs, it is highest in Manhattan. When we release the actual report after today, we will take a deep dive into all 12 of the community districts in Manhattan. We identified the top 5 needs of the businesses. We've been doing a lot of outreach too, so we understand what's going on there. But this, I just wanted to show the difference between the vacancy rates. Many people might not know that the vacancy rate in District 1, which is Lower Manhattan, is over 20%. Very, very high, and continues to be in other areas as well. You see Lower East Side, Central Harlem. By contrast, the lowest rates are in Washington Heights, West Harlem, Upper West Side. So we can get into a little bit more about the reasons, but I just want to start there. Now, this is an interesting one. This is going to show foot traffic. And this is looking at, it's using, how it's defined is we call them visitors who do not live in the district. So this is essentially tourists or commuters, but people who come into the neighborhood and don't live there. And as you'll see, it is all about Midtown. I don't think it's surprising. People go to Times Square, to Broadway, tons of hotels there. So that really remains the focal point, and by a lot. You can see the difference, the difference there. But what was surprising is just how little foot traffic is heading uptown, which is very concerning to us, and something that we are going to want to look into more. But I don't know if you caught it, but you might see that even though there's less foot traffic in some of those areas, the storefront vacancy is actually not extremely high. So that just means that people who live in that community really shop there, which is not a bad thing. Okay, so we did a survey I think over the last few months here, and this shows that nearly half of all businesses feel that their health is average, while a quarter are struggling. I don't think that's surprising to most folks. Top operational burdens that they reported in this survey were around compliance costs. A lot of that has to do with trying to comply with government regulations. Quality of life issues, we will talk about some of that as well. And then infrastructure. That scaffolding being one of the biggest, I think, talked about there. %68% said that they thought that local government has not been helpful in trying to address their needs. So this is something that we definitely want to take back. And this was a quote from, this will set you guys up pretty well. This is a quote from the survey. "It's almost like being visited by the mob. Property tax, fines, and costs are so overblown that it's hard to talk about it." And there was a lot, I just want to say that there was a lot of fear that comes across in these surveys, because you have to remember, these are business owners who have put their life into this. It's, all of their savings, all of their time. And so it's not just a job. This is really a big part of their life. So it's real. When somebody says they don't want to talk about it, I think that's real. But we are going to talk about it. We are joined today by 2 business owners. They are both board members, but they also are the co-chairs of our Storefront Business Coalition. And we want to hear from you about, I don't think you've seen all of this data.
This is so great.
Okay.
Survey, obviously, but thank you.
So I'm going to turn it over to you to get your thoughts on what you heard and how your business is doing.
It's just so great to hear it shared this way. So I'm Patrick Hall. I'm the co-owner of Alon Flowers. Alon Flowers is a retail florist that has been in downtown Manhattan since 1983. I'm the third or fourth owner, depending on how you count it, and my wife and I bought the business 10 years ago. We moved from a 700 square foot space with 3 employees, and now we're in a 7,000 square foot space with 23 employees. But it has not been without difficulty. And I have found a lot of help and support from the chamber and Jessica over the years with all of the challenges. I feel like we've fallen into every gap that it's possible. And I would just ask you all to think about, and all the stats and statistics that we heard from the overall business atmosphere, where does small businesses fit into that? And if you note, I think it's in the place that was most affected, most hurt by interest rates and different costs. And I would just ask everybody to think about, where do we fall in the jobs creation? We're often praised as job creations and often praised as having helped the job market come out of the pandemic. We employ over half of the private sector as small businesses. And yet, we pay more to employ people. We pay more for our 401k. We pay more if we're able to provide that for our people. We pay more for health insurance. We pay, every time you see, when you're talking about real estate and leases, we pay the tax increases as part of our lease. A standard commercial lease in Manhattan passes it on to the tenant. So we bear the brunt of everything. And then you talk about how it's okay for the bigger companies with the leasings and the rates, but who's most affected by the high interest rates? The small business sector. And it's just like, we don't have a voice to be heard. It's almost like taxation without representation, because we have no means of being listened to by legislators. And I don't know if you guys saw the op-ed that Deborah and I just wrote that just got published in Cranes, but it talks about this idea of listening before legislating. And it's just, there's no way to do it except because we don't have lobbyists. We don't have time to go and lobby for ourselves. And Deborah and I are very grateful for this opportunity to even be on the board and taking our time away from our businesses. I have a team installing holiday decorations right now. I know it's a sacrifice every time we go and try to do it for ourselves. So those are some of the things I want to share. I just want to share one more thing before I give the mic to Deborah. And that is, I just heard a quote from our incoming mayor, Zoran Mandani. It says, "You always have to remember that the opinions that you're hearing, especially from the wealthy and the powerful, they will always be amplified in a way that working people's are not." And I would just like to reframe and reflect from the lens of a small business owner. You always have to remember that the voices you're hearing, especially from large corporations and people who control major resources, will almost always be amplified in a way that small businesses and everyday entrepreneurs aren't. Their perspective gets the megaphone. We have to fight to be heard.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Deborah Koenigsberger, and I have been on the board of the Manhattan Chamber for over 20 years, and have watched it grow and do so many amazing things for New Yorkers and for small businesses and medium and large businesses in the city. So that is our voice. This is how we get heard. I have had my retail store for 36 years. I opened in 1989 at 19 West 23rd Street, and it's a women's French themed boutique. And 5 years after that, I started a nonprofit called Hearts of Gold that supports homeless women and children in shelters. And as of last year, we just surpassed 40,000 moms and kids helped by the programs that we provide. I also have a thrift store, and the thrift store and my boutique both serve as job training programs for the moms and the adult kids in the shelters. So in other words, I'm an immigrant. I have 7 jobs. And I'm really proud to stand here as a chamber member and just hear the importance of the work we're doing and the impact it's having. I will tell you that, about 2.5 years ago, once the COVID thing kind of ended and landlords started to talk to their tenants again, I had 2 stores on West 25th Street, and my landlord tripled my rent after COVID. So I had a 2,200 square foot store and a 2,100 square foot store. She wanted $70,000 a month, $35,000 for each store. I am a small business. I am a tiny business. I've always been one store. I don't know how that calculates in someone's brain, but basically it's saying we don't want you here, you can go. So I've moved and just created this concept space, and now I'm in 6,600 square feet and everything is under the same roof, still by the grace of God on West 25th Street. Come and visit. And just, as small businesses, we get hit every day. I don't know who sits behind these chairs and makes these decisions, but small businesses and entrepreneurs, we are the backbone of this city. That's what we do. We hire people, we work really hard, and we provide services. And when I think about, my work every day, being in the store, helping my customers, providing for the moms and kids in the shelters, just all of it. For me, it's what I live for, but it's a high tax. I pay a high tax for that. Talking about real estate taxes. Why are we even paying real estate taxes? We don't own any real estate. And the landlords already take so much more money from us from everything else that I don't understand how this whole system works, and I constantly fight against it, and I, make my voice heard for small businesses. But I will say that I'm a New Yorker. I moved here in senior year of college, and I've lived here ever since. My children were born here, raised here. We live on this island. I love Manhattan. I love the island. I love the community that I'm in. Thank God that my customers have followed me over the years, and I'm still alive to talk about it, but it's hard. Every day is hard. And every day I get up and I go out and I'm determined to not lose. That's what small businesses do. That's what owners do. That's what we don't have time for all I went to Albany last year to help fight for this bill, which thank God Hochul passed, because it was all about the crime and just walking into our businesses, taking everything, and then, get a slap on the wrist. You go back out the next day, the same guy comes back and he robs me again and he gets out of jail. So fortunately, we got that bill passed to just put them in jail. Like, do the time. You did the crime, do the time. So that, and going to your point, Patrick, about not having the time. I mean, I took the day off to go to Albany, and I probably went into 60 different offices to speak to people who make these decisions. And some of them just look right through me. It's like, what do you want us to do? I want you to know that if you sit there and think the way you do tomorrow, when you run out of milk and you want to go downstairs to the convenience store, the bodega, it won't be there, because you're putting us out of business with these rules. So I really just want to make a passionate plea to please support small businesses, support your neighborhood businesses. Big box stores, they own the economy, and we matter. We matter, and we work hard. And so whenever there's an option to, I get it, press a button, order that thing, it's going to come in the mail, you don't have to move. But what happens to your community? When you want to go out to dinner and the restaurants are not there anymore, what happened? When you don't go to work and you don't do your, happy hour in this one, or walk by the store and go, I like that, I think I'll buy it. The stores, we suffer. That's what we live from that. So we need people to, even if you don't come to work every day, the 3 days that you do, try to support locally. Really, it matters to us. And I raised 2 kids, put them through college, and all of this from my small business and from the support of the community. So I try to give back to that community because, without it, they're but for the grace of God, right? And helping these women and children, who are 64% of the moms and kids we help, come out of domestic violence. And that's really ugly, and it's painful, and it's hard, and we do that work every day to try to help them, to keep them on their feet. But we also need your help. So when you shop in the stores and when you support the businesses in your community, it matters. And if nobody else ever tells you that, hear it from me today. And please remember, don't walk by that store and not stop in. Don't go to the bigger stores. You have the option of supporting and keeping our communities vibrant and alive, and not having all these storefronts that are closed. One other point I want to talk about is, just really quickly, storefronts open, but the tenants don't stay. So those numbers that are like, yeah, we're opening businesses, they're open, and 4 months later, that little restaurant closed. They couldn't make it because they opened with hope, aspirations, and they're small businesses. And then they realized that that rent that they agreed to, they can't pay it. You can't pay $30,000 a month if you sell $17 sandwiches. Unless that line goes from your store to Harlem and back every minute of every day, you can't pay that rent. So when you open your business and you expect to make that money, you realize 6 months, 9 months after you put everything you own into opening it, it turns over. And on my corner of my block, this has happened 3 times in the last 4 years. Open, close, open, close. So they're opening, but they're not making it. So that's also a false stat. So thank you all for listening, for being here. I am so honored to be on this board, and I am a New Yorker who will never give up and who will fight for our city.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Patrick. I mean, these are 2 incredible advocates for small business. They do an incredible job. They bring home the issues that small businesses face, and the reality is their voices are the ones that, in many cases, sway the opinions, the judgments, the policies for our elected officials, because that they humanize the whole idea of what the impact is on that level, on that granular level. So just to reframe this, the chamber represents large businesses, mid-sized businesses, small businesses. We don't pit them against each other. We feel that all of them are incredibly relevant. We need the tax bases from the large businesses. We need a thriving community here. We need the street level businesses. It's the collective of all those businesses that make New York City as strong as it is. But again, the 2 of these guys do an incredible job for us, and they help all the businesses based on the way they were able to advocate for the needs of New Yorkers. We have a little time. We're going to open up the floor to questions. You can actually address them to any one of the people that you see here, from Jessica, from her New York report. You can go back to asking about on the macro level, or you can get into the more granular on the retail level. So the floor is open. Love to have questions addressed to these, and please.
Yeah, well, please. Hi, thank you. So first of all, terrific and very admirable, both Deborah and Pat, for all their hard work and efforts that distinguish this city from other small businesses, really make the urban landscape. I just have a couple of observations, not just necessarily a question. One of the observations is on the slides that Jessica put together, it mentioned 47%, almost half of new storefronts opened since 2020. One of the reasons why there were so many new storefronts opening during that time period was during COVID, and there was a great deal of vacancy. And because of that, rents were lower. So the entry points were lower for businesses to open. Then you come to another slide, and it says 11% citywide vacancy and 13% throughout Manhattan. Yes, as Jessica pointed out, we'd like it to be a 5 to 10% vacancy, which makes it a more vibrant urban landscape and shopping district. However, the lower the vacancy rate, the higher the rent, because there's less supply. So it becomes a double-edged sword. To answer and to certainly not to debate anything that Deborah or Patrick have to say, because everything they say, for the most part, I agree with. But in terms of the taxes, the costs of a landlord today are indeed high. Their costs are raised all the time. Taxes are raised, insurance costs are raised, construction costs are raised, etc. So owners are fighting, landlords are fighting with their own challenges as well. So these are complex issues that require, some very strong thinking and a legislature that's necessary to help the business community of all sorts, at all levels, improve. And that's what it's like.
Thank you. In the slides that Jessica showed, she showed that vacancy rates were low in some neighborhoods and that those neighborhoods did not correspond to where there was necessarily the highest foot traffic, which, as she rightly spoke about, just kind of points to the fact that when you have more residential neighborhoods, that people are shopping in those neighborhoods. And so that for me kind of underscores the need for, as part of this focus on small businesses, to also address the lack of affordable housing and housing in some areas. And so I guess my question for Jessica and for the board would be like, what should the chamber be doing to support the conversion of Class B and C commercial space to affordable housing? And then as part of that, are there incentives that we should be advocating for to ensure that there is retail space in those buildings that's affordable to small businesses?
Look, I think that, first of all, there has to be a change in, and I've been saying this for a very long time, there has to be a change in some of the housing policy that occurs in New York, in that every bedroom right now requires a window. Okay, so when you have B and C office buildings being converted, okay, office buildings are generally deep. They're not shallow. They could go from north to south. And as a result, you can't get windows in bedrooms. And the only way to do that is really to create a light well in the center of the building so that you have an atrium. The cost of conversion is high. And what's very, very concerning is that the cost to either rent or purchase a home is excruciating high. I mean, you're looking at one-bedroom apartments in Manhattan that I heard from someone recently didn't even have a dishwasher that was asking over $6,000 a month. Okay, so there has to be a more flexible solution to the housing problem as it relates to allowing certain formats to take advantage of the structures that we have. You can't have necessarily a window. Make the cost of conversion less, put more supply on the market, and therefore the rental rates and purchase prices will become more affordable.
But also need for tax incentives to create those wells that Paul is referring to. So it clearly is a significant issue right now. And it's how do you get it done? What incentives do we need to create to make that happen? And again, please.
So I'm in District 1, and if you guys remember, it's the highest percentage citywide of empty retail storefronts, and yet it's one of the most moneyed areas of the city. So I don't know what that says about why they're empty more downtown and lower Manhattan than everywhere else. I don't understand the economics of it, except that probably small businesses can't afford to occupy these expensive ground floor retail storefronts. 22% vacancy. It's what brings our city average up to 14%. So I don't know the solution, but I like your idea about if there was a way to incentivize these conversions of B buildings or whatever you're calling them, to give a tax incentive to landlords that would rent at a lower rent to a smaller business that would provide those eye candy, necessity bodegas, street level access to creating vibrant communities.
That Monday through Friday traffic is less than what it was. What is going to benefit downtown are more conversions to make it a 24/7 community. And there are conversions taking place. The largest conversion in the city is taking place on Water Street. That will go ahead and help when you get a population that's their own.
There are buildings, commercial spaces in my neighborhood that have been vacant for over 20 years. How is that affordable? I'm just really been curious. How do the landlords afford a vacant space for over 20 years?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't think it ever, in many instances, landlords lose money when their space is vacant. I mean, but at the same token, they have certain costs in order when they are occupied to maintain, right? So, landlords have to make a determination as to whether it pays to rent at a certain price point, because they're not going to go into a rental obligation or a contract for 5 or 10 years where they're going to be losing money either. So, again, the cost of owning is also, I can't speak to, necessarily 14th Street between 5th and 6th, but 14th Street is a very major thoroughfare. And I'm sure they think that it's deserving of a certain rent.
Well, I just wanted to comment as well on the Lower Manhattan vacancy, right, being the representative of the bid in that neighborhood. And you're absolutely right, 100% that we have far too much vacancy in downtown. One of the drivers that, as well as to what Paul has been saying, is a lot of those new residential developments and a lot of the office buildings downtown have added additional retail space over the last 10 or 12 years. So we've created a lot more retail space. Some of that retail space is difficult to lease. Some of those owners have unrealistic rent expectations on what they're getting. They underwrote some of those properties and some of those developments pre-COVID with very, very different assumptions as to what the rent was going to be. And they're dealing with lenders who are expecting them to meet a certain rent roll. And that's part of the challenge. So we have to work through what that means. We have to think about, from an urban planning perspective and an urbanist perspective, as sort of stewards of the public realm in these central business districts, we have an enormous amount of retail space in Manhattan, and consumer spending patterns are changing. We have to think creatively about what we do with some of that. That retail space is not all going to become interesting small restaurants. It's not all going to become the sort of retail that we'd expect it to see. And we have to be creative, and the owners have to be creative about what can go into that space that creates that sort of street level vibrancy. And it helps businesses like yours, that helps the entire city, but that may not be what we have traditionally thought of as a bricks and mortar retail business, right?
Just very quickly, being the neighbor and the beneficiary and from the downtown office scene, is that every day, Monday to Friday, 7 days a week, is 300,000 office workers pre-COVID. That's translating to 1.5 million visitors a week. I cannot afford to have you work 3 days a week. The general formula is this: if you have an office space, every 300 square feet generates a job. If you convert to residential, it's 1,000 square feet. And that person has to be working someplace else during daytime. My lunch crowd is empty. I have 300 restaurants. So to me, the biggest, I don't worry too much about weekends because the visitors, people that want to help Chinatown come down. The Achilles heel for me is the office worker. That's repeat visitors every day for 1.5 million a week. I have 5 fingers, and if you take away 2 of them and you say, I'm back to pre-COVID, you're nuts.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate being here. The idea is we want to make sure we can impact policies that are impacting our businesses, so this way we can have a vibrant city. We need the tax base, we need the services that are provided, and it's all contingent upon having a strong business environment. So again, thank you all for being here. Encourage you to get involved. Jessica, again, can't think of a greater leader for a business community than Jessica is, to be able to really help and assist us drive that message home to our elected officials.